This is the 20 Minutes of Influence podcast with your host, Greg Jameson. Influencer marketing is the process of identifying, researching, engaging, and supporting the people who create high-impact conversations with your customers. On each episode, I talk with industry leaders, business rock stars, and internet celebrities who contribute their knowledge about influencing others and growing your influence. Welcome to the 20 Minutes of Influence podcast. I'm your host, Greg Jameson, and I've got a fun episode for you today because I have a guest with me. His name is Manuj Aggarwal. If you happen to be watching this podcast as opposed to just listening to it, you can see my guest over here. So welcome, Manuj.
Hi, excited to be here.
And let me just tell you a little bit about why I think this is going to be so fun today. For people that have been following me for a long time, you know that I've actually been in the technology business pretty much my whole life. I started out writing software when I was in high school, about a decade before anybody even had home computers. I managed to have the opportunity to have a portable teletype machine in our house that was connected to a mainframe computer. So I have always been in the technology field. I started out creating a software company myself that did computer-aided design for landscape architects. Ran that company for a little over 10 years. We actually had 20 distributors around the world selling our software. And it was a fun time to kind of be in a technology startup. So I'm excited that my guest here today, Manuj, is in the technology startup business, and I'm going to let him tell you a little bit more about himself. So welcome, Manuj, and glad
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited. So just a few words about me. I've been in the technology sector for about 20 years. I started off my career as a junior programmer, but then sort of worked my way up as a senior leader, CTO in multiple organizations. So these days I work with multiple startups and entrepreneurs and help them bootstrap their tech startup. I believe in pragmatic solutions. So, I look at the business and I look at the resources that the entrepreneur has, and I try to come up with creative solutions so that they can get their business up and running, bring it to profitability before they can think about giving their equity away or, raising money. So that helps them, get better evaluations for their business because they're already profitable or at least getting some revenue in. And I find that helps them scale their business organically. Plus, I also help entrepreneurs who are sometimes, they get in too deep and they don't know what they're doing. So, they have invested too much or they have invested too much time and they didn't get the right output that they wanted. So I help entrepreneurs who are in a fix in that situation and get them out basically and get them moving again, get their startup back on track.
Awesome. So for anyone that's listening, we're going to have this podcast today be about business. It's not going to be about writing code, even though I'm sure that both Manuj and myself could talk about that here for a half an hour. But we really do want to talk about the business aspects. And I want to point out to people that you're coming to us today from Vancouver, correct?
That's right, Vancouver, Canada, yeah.
Yeah. So it's exciting to me that the podcast here has actually become fairly international in scope in the short period of time that we've been doing this. We've had guests from the other side of the pond, basically Scotland and England area. Had somebody on here from Pakistan recently, and we're going to be going the other direction here in a couple of weeks and talking to some people in China. So it's
nice.
It's kind of fun. Now, let's get into the actual business of running a technology startup, what would you say that founders should really do to ensure that they succeed in their venture?
Sure. See, all technology is built to serve business. Technology for the sake of technology is no use. It's just a hobby, I guess. So the key thing to understand is what is the business trying to do? What are the opportunities for monetization of the business? Because sometimes a lot of entrepreneurs come across a unique technology and they get excited, but they don't know how to apply that technology, how to build a product or a service out of it, and monetize it. So the key thing is understand the business, understand monetization, and understand the 80%. So understand the 80-20 rule. Like, don't try to overdo things at least when you're starting off. Focus on the high, the more valuable part of the business, which is going to bring the revenue, and put 80% of your resources on that 20% of that work that will be the most meaningful, and forget about the bells and whistles that can come later. So what I find is most people, they actually end up spending too much time on the 80%, like bells and whistles, and making things look pretty, and just following the example of the Apple iPhone. But they tend to forget, when Apple came out with their product, the first product, it was not sexy, it was not very well put together. In fact, it was just a bunch of components nailed to a wooden piece, and it was just functional, very ugly. So that's where they started their journey from. So that's what I tell entrepreneurs to understand the business and ramp it up slowly, focus on the revenue, focus on building value for your customers.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of like the deal of, do one thing really, really well.
Exactly.
Instead of trying to do a whole bunch of things.
Yeah.
Where maybe you aren't doing any of them well because you aren't
exactly
focused on the one thing.
Yeah.
So what do you see are some of the mistakes that are made by tech entrepreneurs?
Yeah. So one of the mistakes I already said, they try to do too much. They try to emulate, these billion-dollar companies, and they have this notion that, if they can do it, we can do it. But they forget there's a huge amount of discrepancy between the amount of resources that these big companies have and a startup has. So they need to act like a startup. They need to, rein in the budgets. The other mistake that people make is they raise too much money too fast. And studies have shown actually that if you have too much money, it's actually inversely correlated to your success. So if you have too much money, it's not a sign of success. It's actually may lead you or your startup to fail. So think about being resourceful. Think about creating smaller budgets, shrinking the scope, getting very, very laser focused on actually what your customers want. And if you hit that sweet spot, and you understand exactly what your customers want, they have good amount of tolerance for other things. Like, some features may not be there, or it may not be as sexy in terms of how it looks, or it may be a little bit slow, or what have you, right? If you're solving a really big problem for your customers, they have tolerance for some other things which may be annoyances, which we can build upon in the next version or when you have some revenue. Whereas most people, they tend to waste all their time and resources on small little things, and they forget the big picture. They forget about how are we going to solve a big problem for my customer. They just focus on how I'm going to make this app look sexy, or how am I going to add new features to this app, whereas there is no core value in that app. So raising too much money too fast, not focusing on your customer and their needs, and trying to emulate big companies when you should really be focused on being resourceful, and leverage the benefits of constraints that you have in a startup.
Yeah, I really want to talk a little bit more about that, because I have been involved actually in a couple of tech startups that were venture backed, and quite honestly, they both failed.
Mhm.
And for the very reason that you're talking about there is they had too much money and, they weren't trying to be creative as in a way of solving their problems. They were just like, well, now we've got some money so we can go out and we can rent a fancy office and we can
Yeah,
hire a private jet to take us to these meetings that we have to go to and so forth.
yeah,
And it's like, you know, it was fun, quite honestly.
yeah,
I enjoyed flying in a private jet.
yeah,
I uh, I enjoyed going to a fancy office, but
Mhm.
it wasn't the kind of thing where, if you don't have kind of this unlimited funding, you have to sit here and be creative with the ways that you're going to
Exactly,
approach the problems. And I think
exactly.
that's true not just in tech companies, but in any
Yeah,
kind of startup.
of course, of course, of course.
Having uh, being forced to be creative
Mhm.
takes you a whole lot further than money does in so many situations.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, you can understand where they're coming from. Like, the first time entrepreneurs, they're, not to demean somebody, but most entrepreneurs, they don't come from wealthy background. So as soon as they have, multi-million dollar bank accounts, uh, it takes certain amount of discipline to handle that kind of money, right? So to your point, renting a fancy office, going on private jets, going in exotic places to have just one meeting. These are just typical signs, and this happens across the board. I've seen, when you get lots of money, you need to find ways to spend that money and satisfy your own inner desires rather than think about building a company, building a product. So yeah,
Yeah. So obviously you have to have enough money at the same,
yeah, for sure.
but I think so you and I are on the same page here, which I think is good because bootstrapping basically what it means is you need to go out there and you need to make some sales.
Yeah,
And
exactly,
they
exactly.
may be sales of people that are. I saw this great quote just today or yesterday, I don't remember when, but it basically said that if you're not totally embarrassed by version one of your product,
Yeah,
then it means that you launched too late.
yeah, yeah,
And,
exactly.
and I think that is so important with whatever it is that you're selling that you need to get your product out there. You need to get it in the hands of a few people,
Yes.
let them beat it up for you,
Yeah,
uh, and then you can start to improve upon it. Much like you said with the original Apple, where uh, the two Steves were out there just screwing down some parts onto a piece of wood, which is
exactly,
exactly what it
exactly.
was.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the other thing is like, at an early stage, you don't even. Sometimes it's kind of hard to explain your concept, so it's better to come up with a prototype or something that sort of works and actually explains what you're trying to do. Because when your customers or your prospective clients, they can see something functioning. It clarifies a lot of things in their mind that, okay, I see, this is what you're trying to do, this is how it can help me. And then they warm up to the idea of, okay, how do I make use of this, how do I use this to solve my problem. So getting to that, your product or service to the market, even though it may be imperfect, is very crucial. And not spending too much time and resources on the first version, and just getting your ideas out there is very important.
Yeah. So we know that we're don't want to just be throwing buckets of money at a problem, and if that's the case, then uh, we have some limitations in our resources, obviously, in terms of how we
Sure.
are going to grow our company, how we're going to build a team, how we're going to actually get a product out there that looks acceptable to the customer.
Yeah,
So we're going to take a quick break here. And right after the break, I want to delve into those questions a little bit
for
further.
sure, for sure. Sounds good. Sounds
All
good.
right, we'll be right back after this. Are you a business owner that runs an online shop? I have a free course available for you. it goes over the features that every great product page should have. This course can double or even triple your sales, whether you are selling on a marketplace like Amazon or selling on your own e-commerce website. The examples use WordPress and WooCommerce, but are applicable to any online store. In this course, we're going to discuss buyer personas, buyer persona specific headlines, high quality photos, videos, buyer specific descriptions, specifications, short descriptions, call to actions, and social proof. You can register for this class and get free access at webstoreslimited.com/free class. This free class includes a 15-minute video lesson, a 20-page ebook, and a handy checklist. That link again is webstoresltd.com/free class. Welcome back to the 20 Minutes of Influence podcast. My guest today is Manuj Aggarwal. And right before the break, Manuj and I were talking about how if we have these limited resources, because we're not going out there and getting venture capital to fund our idea here, then how is it that we can actually grow our business? We need to put together a team. We need to put together the product. And I guess we just need to be able to say, hey, what's the best way to build a solid tech team when we have limited resources?
Sure. This is the theme of my program, Bootstrapping Your Tech Dreams. So, I'll talk about it later. But basically, when you have limited resources, you are forced to prioritize things, right? So you have to let go of certain things which may not be meaningful. And that happens organically because you have limited resources. So that prioritization is the key. Then, you need to follow some frameworks to make sure that you spend your money and time wisely. So, things like prototyping, things like getting validation for your product, even before it's built, so that you don't spend too much money on something that people don't want. And you find out ahead of time. And then once you're sort of relatively sure, okay, this is what people want, then you invest in building that product. So these type of things help. And then on the tactical side, for example, don't lease fancy offices, save money there. You can start building a distributed team these days. Everybody works remotely over the internet, and things work out very nicely. I've worked with multiple teams who are spread across multiple continents, and saves a lot of money because you can outsource to remote locations, and you'll find some really, really, really good talent out there at a very reasonable price. And this is not exploiting somebody, because the economies in different countries, they work differently. So somebody who's worth 60 grand here in US, you may be able to get the same person for 10 grand or 15 grand somewhere else. That doesn't mean that you're exploiting them, but because that is the price in their country for the work they are doing. So building this global team, cutting on your fixed expenses, these are some of the key tactical things you can do to reduce your budget, at least until you have the revenue. And then once you have revenue, then you can hire some salespeople locally and things of that nature. But initially, there are multiple ways, multiple frameworks that you can use to minimize your costs and get up and running.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you specifically about that whole idea of outsourcing here, because quite honestly, I've done it myself, and you're right, you can get some great talent for pennies on the dollar of what it is in the US, but you're actually helping those people. You're not exploiting them. You are truly helping someone in some of those other countries. Now, I know a lot of people will sit here and go, yeah, we really ought to be keeping the business local. We need to be hiring local. They have the not made here syndrome.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
is a global economy today.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, we are talking on this video call. All the components in my computer, they were not made locally. The phones that we use, they are not made locally. So I'm not saying outsource everything, but you can outsource significant amount of your tech team or other resources. Just basically think creatively. I'm not even saying, okay, go outsource to South Asia. If you think about outsourcing to local colleges, hire some interns or things of that nature. They are eager people. They are eager to learn. They are passionate. So if you have limited resources, think about how to maximize the use of those resources, right?
Yeah, and I know that there's going to be people that are like, okay, that's a great idea. You know, I'm going to outsource my stuff to the Philippines or to India or Russia or wherever it may be. Uh, how do you go about finding someone that you can really trust with your
Sure,
technology? Do you just give them
sure.
pieces of it? Uh, how do you find them in the first place? How do you actually pay them?
Sure, sure. I mean, these days it's quite easy. Like, there are sites like Upwork.com, Freelancer.com, which have track record and history of the person or the company that you're trying to hire. So just do your due diligence. But there are so many hundreds and thousands of people providing their services. So just look up the most relevant team that you're for the work that you're looking for. Always negotiate the price. I generally try to set up fixed price contracts because with outsourcing, at least initially when you don't know each other, how you work, and what is the standards that you comply with, it's better to come up with some fixed price projects so that you can limit the scope and limit the amount of investment that you're going to make in them. Once you start to trust each other, you can go with a time and material type of arrangement with these companies. And the second thing is, I always tend to when I hire for a new job, I always tend to hire 2 or 3 freelancers and give them just a tiny slice of the work, like 10% of the work, rather than giving the entire project to one provider. Because at the end of the day, in the freelancer world, you are not 100% sure that things will work out between you and the freelancer or the outsourcing company. So by doing this smaller project, you will get a better feel for, okay, who's more suitable for you and your company. And then once you narrow down, once you make your pick, then you can award bigger projects to those freelancers. And the third thing I will say is, when you hire freelancers or outsource agencies, make sure your communication is top notch. Like, have daily calls, or at least 2 or 3 calls with them every week, so that they don't get too far ahead of you, and you come up with some surprises where you didn't ask them to do certain things, and they did it anyways because they didn't have any feedback or what have you. So the more you can communicate, the better your success will be with these freelancers or outsourced companies.
Yeah, and I think that, technologies like what we're using here today with Zoom or whatever, make it
Yeah.
so that you really can actually get to know these people.
Yeah.
And you do start to build up a trust factor with them. I know we were using a firm out of India, and I'd worked with them for probably 8 years. We'd talked on the phone, and we had done some video conferencing like this and so forth. I had never met them until one of them actually came to the United States a few years later, and I had the opportunity to actually, press a little flesh with them and shake their hands and whatnot. But it was kind of fun. And it turns out, that when people sit here and they're worried about the communication gap, there's a couple things to understand. One is that a lot of these people, I know that the ones I was working with, they were educated in the United States. They'd gone to Cal Berkeley or something and had simply gone back to their home country after they'd gotten their education. And in many cases, you're going to be dealing with, depending upon where you're working, but if you're working with somebody out of the Philippines or India, uh, English is very likely to be their native language. Yeah, they might have an accent, but uh, it's their native language. You are communicating with someone. And a really cool advantage to all of that is that there's so many time zones removed from you that you might sit here and think, you know, I'm going to have this communication gap, if nothing else, because they don't work the same time as me. But I can tell you, it's really cool to give somebody an assignment and you go to bed, you wake up the next morning and it's done.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a 24-hour sort of work schedule that you can set up with your company if you set it up right and you have the communication channels and using, as you said, using tools like Zoom, Slack, Jira, Google Docs, all these collaboration tools are available. Most of them are free. It's very easy to do this these days.
Yeah, and it makes it so that you can actually get your product to market faster because of that.
Yeah, for sure.
You basically have to think, okay, this is not going to be a detriment to me. This is going to be a real positive thing. And as Manuj was saying earlier, you are not taking advantage of these people. It is a global economy. Different parts of the world have different costs of living. And the fact is that in some places in the world, somebody making $15 an hour is a huge salary for them. Not
for sure.
something where you're sitting here going, well, everybody around me, is making 50, 60, $100 an hour.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And then the other thing is, like, certain parts of the world have certain specializations. Like, I've been doing this long enough, so I understand, like, if I need to look for a designer or a UX person, generally Eastern Europe will be really good fit for that. If you need to look for like AI or data science type of work, maybe go to Western India. Things are so once you start to get to know all these different pockets of expertise around the world, you will understand how they live, how much they earn, and how all this global economy and business is helping them, like uplifting communities, because they are getting foreign income. And in fact, even at the prices that they offer, they are actually getting a somewhat of a premium on what they are able to charge locally.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for a startup tech company is that you really have to be able to communicate well, and you need to have a good set of specifications. You need to have some channels in place where you can actually train these people. You can get feedback from them, maybe have some type of a forum where they post their questions, you post answers, they post things that they're working on, partially completed apps, whatever, where you can go in there and take a look at it. And it's a good idea if you have enough technical background that you can actually manage the team, not just be, well, here it is, and take whatever they give you. You want to be able to go in and tweak things yourself and say, hey, let's I like the direction you're going here, but let's try this instead, type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah, and a lot of these companies, they, if you're not very technical or you're not good at managing projects, they will actually assign a project manager, although at a slight extra cost. Or you can work with somebody like me, who is who can act as a liaison between the entrepreneurs and remote teams, because I have business background as well as technical background. So just make sure that you you plan it out, you execute it well, even though you're taking advantage of lower costs, but you still need to be on top of things. And whether it's working with an advisor, an expert, or yourself, just make sure you just don't leave it out there and expect a good product or service to come back without any oversight.
Yep. So this has been absolutely fascinating. We're going to have to wrap it up here, but I think that, to me, one of the reasons why it has been so fascinating is that if people have been listening to previous episodes, that I've been saying that every company, whether you're a service company, you're a solopreneur, you are reselling other people's products, you're a retailer, whatever, you need to have your own products. And the way to get your own products means that you're going to have to go out there and get them built.
Yeah.
It might be a physical product where you're going through a place like Alibaba. It might be a tech product like what we've been talking about here today, where you're going to have an app built for your company or whatever, but everybody needs a product. So this has been great information. Manuj, why don't you tell people how they can stay in touch with you if you've got any offers for them or whatever?
Yeah, so as I was saying, like I have a mentorship program for entrepreneurs, and I help them start up, bootstrap their startup and get them going with the product, with their service, prototyping, getting validation and whatnot. So people can go and sign up for that program. There's a short webinar that I've put together, which provides a lot of insights about the program. And you can get to it by going to go.tetranoodle.com/boot-podcast. So I will share the link with you. Maybe you can add it to the show notes, but I'll repeat it again, go.tetranoodle.com/boot-podcast.
Sounds great. And we'll definitely add that to the show notes so that people can go and take advantage of Manuj's webinar there. So
thank you so much.
Thanks for being here today. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of 20 Minutes of Influence. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you are interested in booking myself as a speaker at one of your events or are interested in any of my coaching programs, please visit gregjameson.com.